Explosions. Explosions. My name's Dan, and this is Explosions. But more specifically, my name's Dan Root, and this is Video Game Animation Study, where we get to the root of video game animation. Explosions are in so many video games. They range from circular ones to square ones, swirly ones to realistic ones, simple to complex, and they're awesome. But what makes an explosion awesome? What does an explosion need to do, and what can you make it look like? To answer these questions, we're going to look at a wide variety of video game explosions and see if we can identify what makes them great, where you might use certain examples, and how we can apply this to make new explosions. Firstly though, what does an explosion really signify? Going right back to a game like Asteroids, a simple scatter of segments was all that was needed to portray an explosion, but more importantly, to portray your winning hit. It was the asteroid breaking apart, a simple graphical solution to a simple visual problem. In many games, an explosion really is just a byproduct of you defeating an enemy or obstacle. It needs to be clearly visible so you can see your victory. You want to keep playing this video game, right? Then you need a cathartic release, something exciting to reward you. Sure, there are more long-term things for this like power-ups, but that initial defeat should look meaningful and impactful. Explosions are a visual result of your skills, or at least they can be. Sometimes an explosion is just an explosion, or sometimes something that shouldn't explode does explode. Let's also consider that there are mainly two types of explosions. There are those which are the result of an enemy or obstacle being destroyed, and those which are caused by actual bombs. However you look at it, explosions need to feel awesome in your game. By the way, I'm on about in-game explosions that you have control over, not the ones within movie scenes. Representation of explosions in games generally reflect real explosions, but can kind of be abstract too, being represented as more of a stylized pop or burst. So, what's the common elements in all explosions? Let's take a look at some and see if we can identify the similarities. Let's start somewhere familiar in the 2D realm. Sonic the Hedgehog. There are two explosions in this game, one for item boxes and enemies, and one for boss defeats. They're pretty simple actually, consisting of a mere 5 frames and at a slower frame rate than the rest of the game. The grey one is less striking than the fiery one, and both kind of seem like a burst of air, like a balloon pop with smoke inside. It's a functional animation, kind of boring but not intrusive and does the job. If we were to enhance these explosions, what could we do? Well, Sonic Mania has the answer. There's 3 types this time, one for items, one for enemies, and one for bosses, and each one looks different and more intense than the previous, and there's at least 14 frames for each, meaning a much smoother and more lingering effects than the originals. There's more fire visible through the smoke, and there's a much more intense explosion, with these spikes emanating here at the beginning, followed by dissipating smoke, all things missing in the classic version. I feel these spikes are important in demonstrating the strength of an explosion. Now, would you say these enhanced animations add to that feeling of victory, or are too distracting? Do you think there's a reason that boss explosions are more glamorous than item and enemy explosions? Okay, let's have a look at these 3 explosions from Mega Man 8, Mega Man X, and Mega Man X4. 8 starts with the spikes, while the X games begin with a circular flash, with the X one being the shortest and X4 the longest. Mega Man games can end up with lots of on-screen carnage, so there'll be many explosions all at once, and though these all differ slightly, they're all good examples of grouped explosions. When you compare this to 8-bit Mega Man explosions, all they really have are the flashbangs. But hey, that's fine, it's functional. Now let's have a look at this medium-sized explosion from Metal Slug, possibly the best shoot-'em-up series, and one of the masterpieces of sprite animation. Really similar to X4's explosion, right? Just with many more frames and a longer lasting linger of smoke that kind of collapses in on itself. Still has that rising circular smoke and shrinking fireball in the middle. No fire spikes, but the circular flash and lasting smoke and fire. Trust, I could do a whole episode on Metal Slug's explosions alone. There are so many variants depending on the thing being destroyed. We've got one for big bosses, one for bombs, one for enemies. It's great. Let's look at this older one from R-Type. It's much more simple, but a lot more stylized, going for a sort of crescent moon ending to its animation, without offering much intensity. Do you think there's a reason the explosion isn't crazy and over the top? It's probably so the on-screen madness isn't too distracting, because shoot 'em ups often look mental as they are, without the messiness of huge explosions getting in the way of what you're doing. Keeping it simple like this is necessary to the gameplay. Sparkster has a quick, fiery outward explosion, no sort of gravity taking place, and no smoke, flash, or spikes. A different approach, quick and effective. Strider 2, again, has a flashbang, but it has almost a lens flare type glare just before, and it pulls in after the flashbang to then reveal fire spikes and a dissipating fireball. No smoke this time. You'll find the further back you go, the more simple the animations are, but they'll often be more creative or stylized. Sometimes this finds its way through evolution and you'll see designs from 8-bit games referenced in modern games, like this explosion here in Mega Man 11. Going back to shoot 'em ups, let's look at the scratchy, hand-drawn explosions of Alien Hominid. There are a myriad of power-ups in this game that offer different powers to your gun, but this also extends to your grenades, so you get a whole host of grenade explosions as well. But they all have the same kind of design in common, in that there's a big plume that ascends after the big flash, with subtle fire spikes just showing through the smoke. And hey, the smoke plumes kind of end in that crescent moon effect like an R-Type. There's also a slight reference of a circular flash here as well, but like the smoke, it's being given the crescent moon effect. This crescent moon effect is helpful in portraying the direction and strength an explosion might be taking, and you'll see it a lot in 2D and cartoony looking games. Okay, so there's this explosion when you defeat a castle in Yoshi's Island, and it's always looked dreadful to me. There's no circle flash, no fire spikes, no rising smoke or falling embers, and it takes ages. Admittedly, this isn't really that type of game, and it's got a children's drawing aesthetic going on, so I'm understanding of why it's not a super cool explosion. But imagine this in place of another explosion, like Mega Man X. Just wouldn't do, would it? Although if you substitute it the other way around, it could look okay. Okay, let's round up the 2D stuff with Bomb Chicken, a game built around explosions. So these bad boys are going to need to look exceptional, which they do. I mean, there's so much going on in here. You've got a bit of everything. There's initial spikes at the beginning, a flashbang to mark the blast radius, debris that goes flying off, dark smoke at the back, fire in the middle, and light smoke at the front, while the dark smoke lasts the longest. What I love is that the explosions wrap around whichever surface they're on, so it looks really dynamic as well. And the screen shakes when they go off, shaking so hard to offset the colours at the edge of the screen. The one thing I really like is the swirly design of the clouds, which brings me nicely onto Wind Waker's explosion, which are my absolute favourites. You've got that huge set of spikes at the start, which retreat to reveal the rapidly expanding fire nested in a ring of smoke, while debris shoots off in big arcs, and the embers slowly fade away. And there's that big screen shake as well. Explosions in a game like this definitely need to show that they can cause damage. These will be breaking apart big chunks of stone, so the resulting explosions need to look and feel powerful. Now let's contrast this with a much more realistic game like GTA 5. When you indulge in your hellish rampage fantasy of obliterating everything in sight, you can unleash a barrage of missiles and grenades. The grenades have a smaller explosion than the rockets, but they're both the same, essentially, especially when they're both destroying cars. You've not got any spikes or flashes, but you've got big plumes of fire and smoke with flying debris, with the fire really textured and bright, and the lingering smoke tapering off and that camera shake. When you use this a lot in one go, it looks proper mental, and considering this is a realistic looking game where most weapons are just guns for the most part, seeing an explosion like this from a rocket launcher is just beautiful. Just Cause 3, man, these are something else. Again with the realism angle, they're bright, got mushrooms of fire and smoke, spikes and flying debris, and lingering clouds, and of course your good old screen shake. It just gets everything right on each level. And the distance that everything reaches is it's good, it's too good. Same as Star Wars Battlefront, bright textured fire bursts, tiny cinders that fall down afterwards slowly, and the thick lingering smoke afterwards. Now let's just take a look at Lylat Wars explosions. No flash circle, no spikes, no lingering smoke or outward drifting clouds, or flying debris. Just a simple collapse of structure, falling into a small grey and orange cloud. Nothing especially wrong with this, as we've discussed that certain explosions need to fit the idea of the game, but if we have a quick look at how Star Fox Zero handles this, it's actually kind of similar, except we have a flash and spike combo at the beginning, tiny additional debris that spark off from the main cloud, and the fire is the thing that lingers on after, leaving behind these little licks that evaporate. Although I'm not much of a fan of how the fire kind of fades away, I'd much prefer the fire to stay and kind of just evaporate, you know what I mean? Fading it kind of looks a bit lazy. And then if we compare this to the 2D explosions in Star Wing, a simple rising mushroom of fire with debris flying off. Again, matching the needs of the gameplay. Super Mario 3D World has some interesting explosions, kinda unlike what we've seen so far. Very cartoony, a load of small clouds pushing out in random directions, some upward flying spikes, and then a rising ring of fire and smoke, kinda like a mini nuke. I think it looks really cool, a little over the top, but fitting in the Mario universe. Nice and clean looking for a nice and clean looking game. Super Mario Odyssey has a slightly different approach. There's some tiny spikes, no flash, but the main fire at the beginning becomes the dark clouds as the explosion pushes out, revealing some crescent ending fire underneath, while the centre of the explosion is actually hollow. Nice mixture of techniques there. So, what do we see from all these examples? It seems to be that initial fiery flash, spiky projections, flying debris, a crescent ending of smoke, and evaporating licks of fire after an expanding cloud of fire. Velocity and resistance can be seen as factors into designing an explosion. The velocity could be the initial strength and expansion of the smoke, fire and flash, and the resistance can be how long and far each element expands to. This might not hold true for every example, but I think it's a good place to start in deciding how your explosion will look and feel. For instance, Bomb Chicken's explosion might have a high velocity and high resistance, but Sonic Mania's boss explosion might have mid velocity and low resistance, and ones like X4 and Metal Slug might have a low velocity and minus resistance where the smoke falls in on itself. I don't know, it needs some work, but I feel like this is a really simple way to approach it if you're designing your own one. How about we have a go? Okay, I kinda like the flash from X4, I like the flash spikes from Bomb Chicken, and I like the crescent ending to the fire from Mega Man 11 and Alien Hominid, and I like the lingering smoke from Wind Waker, and I like the embers from GTA 5. Not much help we had to fit in, but let's have a go. So I've got some particles here which I've just changed to red, and I'm going to sort of have them dissipate after a short amount after the flashbang here. I'm going to add some sort of a darker grey smoke after these as well. Let's have a little play around here. So they've got sort of a darkened fire behind that. Just put the smoke behind that out a little bit more. Change the particle effects. Change some colours here. Okay, so we've got like the flash and the spikes and sort of the dissipating fire and smoke. Okay, add a little bit more kind of brightness in here. Okay, put a little bit brighter. Should we try and add some sort of sparks and embers that fly off here? Okay, it's looking pretty cool. Maybe we can spread them out a little bit more. And, okay. Yeah, this is looking cool. Okay, let's sort of blur these so it kind of looks like they're going out further than quicker than they need to. Okay, yeah, I'm kind of liking to look at this. Cool, what do we think? Not bad, I feel. Might be a bit over the top for an action platformer. But we know that we can adapt the type of explosion from the type of game we have. So we can get all sorts of results if we wanted. I hope you found this video entertaining and of some help to those interested in and designing explosions for your game. They can be stylised, simple, realistic, and anywhere in between. Let me know what your favourite or least favourite explosion is in the comments below. If you're interested in animation in video games and need to see more, then check out my buddy Dan's new channel, New Frame Plus, which also discusses video game animation. Thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel, who get the chance to see these episodes early, have access to my new monthly post of recent and upcoming games with great animation and art, and behind the scenes access to my latest productions. And thanks to all my subscribers and Twitter followers and all of your comments and support. See you next time with Mega Man 11's animation. Love you, bye.